There's something deep inside, something that's calling. It's calling you and I. It's taking us up high to healing. A simple act of kindness brings such meaning. A smile can change a life. Let's start living and feeling. Let's start healing. Heal and you will be healed. Break every border. Give and you will receive. It's nature's order. There is a hidden force pulling us closer. It's pulling you and I. It's pulling us up high to healing. A simple act of kindness brings such meaning. A smile can change a life. Let's start and feeling. Let's start healing. Hearts in the hand of another heart, and in God's hand are all hearts. An eye takes care of another eye, and from God's eye nothing hurts. Seek only to give and you receive. So heal and you will be healed. Healed and healed. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Did you stop?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the Book of the World, Night 6. Today we are blessed to have Brother Mohamed Dehnavi as our guest. Unfortunately, Brother Hassan is ill today, but inshallah he'll join us as soon as he's recovered. Brother Mohamed, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you for coming onto the show.
So it was my pleasure having you with us.
Could you give us a brief synopsis of what we're going to discuss today?
Inshallah, tonight we will explore the notion of human dignity. Is human dignity earned or is it intrinsic in light of the Quranic principle of the sanctity of human life? The second topic will be revolving around the notion of soulful tears in light of knowing the truth and the dilemma of moral apathy in late modern society.
Okay, excellent. Well, before we engage in the discussion, we'll first turn over to Sheikh Mohamed Dehnavi, and he'll do some recitation of the Holy Quran, inshallah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. ومن يهاجر في سبيل الله يجد في الأرض مراغما كثيرا وسعة ومن يخرج من بيته مهاجرا إلى الله ورسوله ثم يدركه الموت فقد وقع أجره على الله وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا.
After.
Well, Brother Muhammad, I believe the first topic that we're going to discuss today is dignity, if I'm not mistaken. And I guess my first question to you, and inshallah the audience, we encourage you to engage in the discussion, particularly on the online chats. The first question I have is human dignity intrinsic, or is it something that we earn? And just on a side note, perhaps to start us off, the first question I have is, What we find in the last century or so, the standard of living has gone up drastically. We find that we've taken leaps into modernity, yet the human person has been devalued in many ways, particularly in light of World War I and World War II. Is there a link, a correlation between an increased standard of living, increased comfort, and the value of the human being?
Thank you, Brother Muhammad, and thank you to Sheikh Mohamed Dehnavi for the beautiful recitation of the Holy Quran. To answer your question, permit me first and foremost to introduce the central passage of the Quran that will act as the driving force for understanding this concept. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, من أجل ذلك كتبنا على بني إسرائيل أنه من قتل نفسا بغير نفس أو فساد في الأرض فكأنما قتل الناس جميعا ومن أحياها فكأنما أحيا الناس جميعا. The Quran teaches us through the tradition of the people of Israel a fundamental principle. Killing one person without just cause is like killing all of humanity. Saving one life is equivalent to saving all of humanity. Every time I think about the modern question of dignity, tracing it back to the age of enlightenment and contextualizing it in light of 2 world wars and whatnot, I recall Francis Voltaire's novel Sadiq, in which he says humans are like insects, devouring one another on a little atom of mud. Since the scientific revolution, which opened groundbreaking discoveries for humanity in the modern age, especially with Copernicus, for example, who discovered that the Earth is not the center of the universe, and that the Earth, which is the habitation of man, actually revolves around the sun. And so since then, Baruch Spinoza, for example, came to tell us that the human being follows physical laws of necessity. And since then, we started to notice that the human being was becoming more like an instrument for power mechanisms, such as the modern state. And it reminds me of the Nazi Germany era, which witnessed one of the darkest chapters in human history, whereby the human being not only was devalued, but the justification for such devaluation of the human being was so blunt in the very way the Holocaust was implemented and in the very way the Holocaust was justified. Certain trials and certain legal reflections on what happened back then, and as you know, the first article in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights established that all humans are born free and equal, and they are all equal in dignity and right. However, when you ask those great generals in Nazi Germany, what made you commit such atrocities? The very simple answer they would give was, we were ordered to serve our country. We were commanded to serve our nation and our people. And this concept, which to an extent reminds us of the dilemma of the human being, in the sense that we kill but then we try to justify our killing in order to live in a peace of mind. It reminds me of a concept in existential philosophy explored by Jean-Paul Sartre, and that is bad faith. Jean-Paul Sartre defines bad faith as when someone engages in any form of activity out of free will but says that he did so out of necessity. So saying, for example, I killed the other, I committed an atrocity against a particular other out of necessity which was beyond my control. I had no choice but to follow the orders of my party or the orders of my state. Jean-Paul Sartre calls this contradictory moral human condition bad faith, such that we tend to justify our actions by virtue of escaping from our freedom. Take the example of a lady who is speaking on the phone and engaging in gossip. She sees her child about to drown in the water. She does not get up to prevent a catastrophe from taking place, but remains speaking over the phone by, claiming and believing that it was beyond her control, and this kind of situation does not require any sense of responsibility. What this teaches us, Brother Muhammad, I think, is that humans tend to face their freedom by escaping from it, as opposed to expressing a sense of responsibility. It's on the one hand. On the other hand, given all the achievements that we mentioned earlier, what we missed is human dignity as an intrinsic value. The human individual in the Islamic worldview is an irreplaceable link in the order of the universe, meaning that the human being cannot be and cannot become an instrument in the hands of any power, including religious powers, political powers, cultural powers, name it as you wish. And it reminds us of Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, who once said, "For what does it profit humanity if it gains the world and yet loses its soul?" What makes a human being unique and different? If all these scientific discoveries enabled us to become humble, how can we re-establish, in light of these facts, the uniqueness of the human being? And again, returning to our original question, I think the missing link in this contemporary discussion is the moral agency of the human being. What makes us unique is morality, not intelligence, not consciousness, but self-consciousness. And this is something that we came to discover even in sociology. It's not pure philosophy, it's not pure theology, not pure spirituality. There is a well-known school in sociology known as symbolic interactionism. George Herbert Mead coined the term I and me. He said human beings are able to perceive and interact with the world directly through his or her own consciousness. This is the I. you become at the center of understanding the world and interpreting the world. But he said human beings also have the knee, which is the process of understanding the world as an impartial observer by engaging in dialogue with significant others, such as parents, peers, scholars, people in society who come from different walks of life and have experience and wisdom. This socialized dialogue with the other is what gives us this sense of self-consciousness, such that we are able to perceive the world from outside of our positions. And hence, when science becomes scientism, the new priesthood, and morality and spirituality is dethroned and dismissed as superstition, that's when algorithm and big data replaces the human dignity by virtue of its impressive control and impressive intelligence. But as I said, intelligence is not what makes us humans. Algorithms can predict, but humans will decide. Algorithms can function at a high speed, but human beings can pause and reflect. So, going back to the point about dignity, and going back to the Quranic passage, what stands out in all this discussion is the human being and the intrinsic dignity of the human being. Why is the human being so unique? In the pre-Socratic Greek society, human dignity was something that needed to be displayed through the virtue of heroism. Basically, a hero was someone who was capable of displaying his worthiness and great deeds. Socrates came and said, human excellence is not forged, it's not established on the battlefield, but rather in the pursuit of truth. Which means that the force of ideals can lift us above the pool of hostility. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says to us that the killing of one individual human being equals the killing of the entire humanity. What this means, Brother Muhammad, going back to the notion of bad faith, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to us, this principle does not only apply, as we may think at face value, to those who actually kill, but more dangerously, it applies to those who give the green light to kill. Whether self-proclaimed religious figures who give fatwa to kill the other, whether it is the modern state that decides to destroy a particular minority. This killing by order and command, this killing by a pretext, whether it's religious, legal, scientific or cultural, is what lies at the heart of من قتل نفسا بغير نفس فكأنما قتل الناس جميعا. This is why someone who undertakes the order of killing may kill one person or 10 people or 100 individuals, but the one who gives the order to kill may provide the green light to kill infinitely, Why? Because now there is some form of justification.
So it's almost like a gateway.
It's like a gateway, absolutely. And so this is من قتل نفسا بغير نفس فكأنما قتل الناس جميعا. We cannot downplay one individual in the grand scheme of things. And that's why in the Islamic tradition we have narrations that say on the day of reckoning God resurrects a number of prophets with only a small number of followers. You may wonder, why is this the case? Prophets were sent to nations and communities. How come out of a large cohort of people, the recipients of the divine message, you see a handful of followers on the Day of Judgment? I think this is teaching us a lesson in light of the ayah. That in that particular community, God knew that there were 3 people, let's say, who were honestly willing to receive divine revelation and guidance because they were sincere and genuine truth seekers. And so they deserve, regardless of their status, regardless of their number, regardless of their position, regardless of the time in which they lived, they deserved receiving an entire message in its own right. And they deserved to receive prophets to respond to their innate core in searching for the truth. I think this insight can provide us with an entry point into understanding the intrinsic value of human dignity. And this is why I believe in our day and age we have a greater responsibility to affirm this dignity and not fall into the trap of civilizational achievements whilst dismissing the very moral status of the human being, regardless of their size, regardless of their culture, regardless of their color. As they say, you know, we may be the dust of the earth, but there is within each and every one of us the breath of God.
Wow, that's beautiful.
We may be the dust of the earth, but within every and each one of us you will find the breath of God. وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. And so to understand this concept, I think we need to continue the ayah. وَمَنْ أَحْيَاهَا فَكَأَنَّمَا أَحْيَا النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا. And whoever enlivens human life, and life generally speaking, it is as though he has enlivened the entire humanity and the entire creation. You know, when I was studying biology in my HSC back in the days, I came across a French scientist by the name Louis Pasteur. I'm sure you've heard of him.
Louis Pasteur, yeah. Pasteurization.
Absolutely, absolutely. This man reminds me of the ayah. وَمَنْ أَحْيَاهَا فَكَأَنَّمَا أَحْيَا النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا.
In what way?
In the sense that he was among the pioneers of discovering vaccination. He was the one of the founders of microbiology and the germ theory, which helped us understand bacteria and how bacteria functions and how we can protect not just human life but also the animal world and even plants. Isn't this individual an exemplary role model of وَمَنْ أَحْيَاهَا فَكَأَنَّمَا أَحْيَا النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا? This biophilic tendency and outlook to life. More than that, Pasteur was someone who experienced a brain stroke. I think this was in the mid-19th century. Yet he persevered. he continued to research whilst being paralyzed
Amazing.
in order to advance humanity and in order to preserve the biophilic essence of humanity. I think we need to recognize these people and pay tribute to them every time we read this ayah in the Holy Quran. And so I come to a conclusion here in the form of a story which puts into perspective all this discussion from the start to the beginning. And this story took place in the 20th century during colonialism. Roger Garaudy, the well-known French philosopher who was a committed Marxist at the start of his philosophical struggle and career, yet he was a true champion of humanity in that he stood by the side of the marginalized and the oppressed, just like Ali Shariati and Che Guevara and others. Roger Garaudy says, once upon a time I found myself in a civil protest against colonialism in Egypt, in the streets of Algeria. He said, I was protesting against the French colonial power, and I ended up being a captive, and so my life was at risk. Garaudy says, at that point my entire existential life changed 180 degrees because of an illiterate Algerian soldier in the French army. No philosophy, no knowledge, no theory. Someone who has this worldview of من قتل نفسا بغير نفس أو فساد في الأرض فكأنما قتل الناس جميعا. This illiterate young Muslim Algerian serving in the French army was ordered and commanded by a general in the army to shoot Roger Garaudy. And as you know, because Roger Garaudy was a philosopher, his presence with the protesters on the ground was a very dangerous symbolic message. And so there had to be such a kind of command in order to put an end to any upcoming revolution against the French. So the French general said to the Algerian soldier, shoot Roger Garaudy. The soldier refuses in a moment of truth and says, I will not shoot him. And as you know, in military service, not obeying the command of a general is what? It's treason. It is a betrayal. And so the general was shocked. He said, I am instructing you to shoot him. The Algerian soldier, and Roger Garaudy was watching, said, I will not shoot him because he is an innocent human being. He said to him, shoot him. He said, I will not shoot him because my worldview forbids me to kill an innocent human being. At this moment, Roger Garaudy said, there is something extraordinary and significant in the worldview of this illiterate young Algerian Muslim soldier in the French army that empowered him to enact a moment of truth that could have ended his life. And that's how Roger Garaudy made his way into Islam. This is, my dear brothers and sisters, Brother Muhammad, this is an example of an experience. Worldview as an experience. I think if we can reflect on these questions for our contemporary discussion around human dignity and what it means, and these are just snapshots and insights, we would be able to make very important steps forward into the future. Without further ado, I would like to see if you have any thoughts to share and contributions before we go to our first break, Brother Muhammad, and then continue after our second part. Would you like to add your comments, your contributions?
Thank you, brother. It's a beautiful analysis that you've given of the verse. And one thing that I found quite interesting was the fact that you mentioned that by almost taking the life of one, it becomes a gateway, an exponential gateway to taking the life of humanity, because you've almost given that green light. But then you pointed out conversely, like in the case of Louis Pasteur, that to save the life of one becomes exponential, and you can save the life of humanity. I thought that was a really beautiful sort of take on it. But on that note, I was wondering, you know, the scientific world today, perhaps not the scientific, perhaps our worldview today is quite enrooted in self-gain. It's quite enrooted in this capitalistic sort of worldview. Is there a possibility that we could transform to a worldview in which the human dignity is placed at the forefront of all our work that we do, of all things that we create in our day-to-day social interactions, in our work? Because at the moment it seems as though productivity and capital and objectives take the limelight. So is there a middle ground between the two? Do we have to replace one with the other? Or perhaps is there a synthesis?
Just to make things succinct and give our viewers a break, I think the answer to your question would require much reflection. I'm not of the type that rushes to give answers to big questions. Whatever brilliant question is raised, especially in our day and age, warrants attention and reflection in order to be respected for its character and for its dignity. But I think in a nutshell, one word would suffice in this context by saying perhaps we need to revisit and relearn the basics. That is, we need to learn how to pause. If machines are operated by pressing on the green light, human beings operate by pressing on the pause button.
Interesting.
And perhaps this can help us conceptualize these issues within a more quiet environment of reflection and contemplation. Without further ado, let us and permit me to go for a short break, a 5-minute break, and then inshallah we'll continue our second part.
Thank you very much, and please don't forget to like, subscribe and share to our channel, and also leave your comments below. Thank you, much appreciated.
It's so hard to explain what I'm feeling, but I guess it's okay, 'cause I'll keep believing. There's something deep inside, something that's calling. It's calling you and I. It's taking us up high to healing. A simple act of kindness brings such meaning. A smile can change a life. Let's start believing and feeling. Let's start healing. Heal and you will be healed. Break every border. Give and you will receive. It's nature's order. There is a hidden force pulling us closer. It's pulling you and I. It's pulling us up high to healing. A simple act of kindness brings such meaning. A smile can change change your life. Let's start healing and feeling. Let's start healing. Hearts in the hand of another heart, and in God's hand are all hearts. An eye takes care of another eye, and from God's eye nothing hurts. Seek only to give and you receive. So heal and you will be healed. Healed, it's تبسمك لأخيك صدقة، كل معروف صدقة. أمر بين يدي قلب، يد الله كل قلب. عين ترعى عينا وعين الله ترعى، كلمة طيبة صدقة. تبسمك لأخيك صدقة، كل معروف صدقة. اللهم اشفي شفاء لا يغادر سقما. اللهم اشفي شفاء لا يغادر سقما. اللهم اشفي شفاء لا يغادر سقما. اللهم اشفي شفاء. Let's start healing.
Assalamu alaikum, and welcome back to part 2 of our discussion. And in this discussion we're going to be talking about the notion of the worldview and how it impacts our relationship with others. But before we commence this discussion, we would like to listen from Sheikh Dehnavi of a pre-recording of the Quran recitation. We'll be back shortly.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول إلا من ظلم، وكان الله سميعا عليما.
Alright, well then, to start us off, I would like to open up with a question that we got from the audience, and I think it's a great question. Just on the notion of dignity, would there need to be a revision of the notion of capital punishment in quote-unquote Islamic countries as well as countries by and large? So for example, the United States does have a death penalty in certain states, as well as China and a couple of other countries. In terms of the notion of human dignity, do you think we ought to revise this notion of capital punishment, particularly in light of Islamic law?
Thank you, Brother Muhammad, and thank you to our viewers and participants for daring to pose courageous intellectual questions, especially on this beautiful occasion of exploring the Book of the World. You really connect us to the spirit of the discussion. In response to this question, I think contextualizing capital punishment in the broader human reality could provide us with some clue as to how to tackle these kind of controversial questions. Capital punishment is historical and sociological.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that capital punishment served at a particular point in time as a possible answer to a particular question.
Okay.
And this answer was conditioned by the limitations, the narrow horizons, and the rudimentary experience of particular societies and communities. Philosophers and social scientists in our day and age are beginning to discover that what we need to tackle in today's society, especially around these questions, is not trying to answer unanswered questions, but rather we need to question unquestioned answers. Capital punishment is one of these unquestioned answers that we take for granted in today's society.
Why do you think it's unquestioned?
I think because, number one, we tend to confuse the means with the ends.
Right.
Meaning that we master the ends. For example, we want to achieve justice. We don't want, for example, those who engage in criminal acts that undermine human dignity to, get away with their crime. And so our genuine concern with these ends, with these goals, tend to create a zeal by virtue of being emotional and by virtue of being passionate about finding the ideal means to address these problems and to achieve these goals. We tend to choose particular methods that we think would serve that higher end. But as I said, the discussion again takes us back to the limits of our knowledge, the limits of our understanding. Has capital punishment really achieved the end? Has capital punishment maintained the dignity even of the criminal? Because we know, even in the Islamic worldview, that al-afu is something that is proposed as an ideal response, even in the most difficult of circumstances. وَإِن تَعْفُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. To pardon, to forgive. And I think perhaps a possible wisdom behind this interpretation is the transformation of criminal behavior into decent human behavior, let alone the question of reintegrating criminals after serving.
So more of a rehabilitative model,
Rehabilitative.
as opposed to retributive, in which it's an eye for an eye, lex talionis.
Absolutely, absolutely. So again, the actual axis of discussion revolves around whether capital punishment, from a consequentialist perspective, has achieved the end of deterring criminals, number one. Number two, of contributing to the decline of criminal rates in society.
Right.
So again, if we can think of better alternatives, such as art, for example, today in the social sciences, we are beginning to revisit humanities in order to see how art can help those serving, in prison
as a rehabilitation.
And rediscovering, their own sense of moral conscience. So again, these are the points for us to think about, and inshallah we can discuss them in further detail as we move on.
On that note, worldview, and how does our worldview affect our relationship with others? And why is it important? I mean, what are the fruits of our worldview?
Our worldview is the overarching view we have towards life, towards ourselves, towards other people. Basically, our language, which shapes our ideas and describes our ideals, has a great impact on how we engage with the world. There are tribes in Africa, for example, that do not distinguish between the blue color and the green color. I can't remember whether this is in Latin America or Africa, but I'm guessing it was in Africa, in an anthropological study. And so when you raise your curiosity to explore why is this the case, you will realize that in their language there is no such thing as blue and green.
Wow.
Whereas other languages permit naming certain colors. And so language is what allows us to become aware of the world.
So would you say it's one of the sources of our worldview?
Absolutely. So language is one of the sources of our worldview. And that's why when we explore the Quran, we explore the etymological roots of the word.
The message is rooted in the language.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a very important, I think, methodology to help us understand the Quranic realities through human experience. And let me now turn to the focus of our second part, which is ayah number 83 in Surah Al-Ma'idah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَإِذَا سَمِعُوا مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَى الرَّسُولِ تَرَى أَعْيُنُهُمْ تَفِيضُ مِنَ الدَّمْعِ مِمَّا عَرَفُوا مِنَ الْحَقِّ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا آمَنَّا فَاكْتُبْنَا مَعَ الشَّاهِدِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran talks about a particular group from the people of the book. Our scholars interpreted this verse and contextualized it in the experience of the first migrants, the first Muslim migrants to Abyssinia, when they were guided by the Prophet to seek refuge in the land of the just Christian king An-Najashi. And by the way, An-Najashi is a title that refers to the symbolic name of kings in that land, and not specifically to the historical figure of the just Christian king. Anyway, his real name would imply the gift, the person who has a gift and who is a gift giver. Nevertheless, An-Najashi was among the people whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described in this ayah. وَإِذَا سَمِعُوا مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَى الرَّسُولِ تَرَى أَعْيُنَهُمْ تَفِيضُ مِنَ الدَّمْعِ مِمَّا عَرَفُوا مِنَ الْحَقِّ. There is an extraordinary sense of imagery in this passage that describes how the just king and his people in the court would shed genuine and sincere tears. I call them soulful tears after knowing the truth and after actively listening to the testimony and to the honest case of the Muslims who sought refuge in the Abyssinian land. And so this topic in itself allows us to enter the field of psychology, of sociology, of philosophy in late modern society. What do I mean by this topic allowing us to think about the notion of tears? And this is again how the book of the world is manifested in the world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the climate cries, the environment cries, the grass gets wet and is damp.
Mm-hmm.
Even the walls are said to weep due to the effects of humidity. Sometimes philosophy is like a levee, meaning a raised bank alongside a river that prevents any flooding. Critical thinkers today critique some philosophers who have a brilliant mind but a dead heart through this example. They say they are like a levee that prevents that flood of emotions and tears and love and empathy, simply because they are engulfed in objectively understanding the world. So they keep back the flood of a generous soul. And so these philosophers, obviously not all of them, but some of them, they keep the levee in good repair. And that's why their tears are so rare. My dear brothers and sisters, this issue is not limited to philosophers, but is something that we witness in society as a whole. This is called apathy syndrome, or what Zygmunt Bauman, the Polish sociologist, in his well-known book, describes it as moral blindness.
Mm-hmm.
And they give the example, and I hope Dr. Hassan Lamy excuses us because he's not among them. They give the examples of doctors to describe apathy syndrome. They say doctors try to be sympathetic to patients, to those who suffer, but they are too professional to really feel anything. And so what makes us shed tears as human beings? And going back to the first topic, what makes us so different? What makes us so unique? I don't think it's human intelligence, as I said earlier. It's something deeper. I believe that one of the things that make us unique is tears. And you may say that this is cheap optimism or superficial emotionality. But with the neurological discoveries, we are no longer perceiving tears and the expression of emotions as a superficial and as a form of self-deception and flight from reality, but rather as a way of changing reality, as a way of rebuilding our world in light of our deep human experiences. You know, the notion of tears in this ayah reminds us of Friedrich Nietzsche, the very pessimistic philosopher of the modern age.
It seems like almost a paradox.
Absolutely. When people read Nietzsche, they don't read Nietzsche from the beginning to the end. They only read Nietzsche the nihilistic, which is a very sad reality. Because Nietzsche addressed the question of Islam in light of Christianity, but not many of us know this fact. And he praised Islam, but that's not the point. The point is to go back to the notion of tears.
Mm-hmm.
Nietzsche, the human being, was one who shed tears before his breakdown towards the end of his life. In one of his writings, before his breakdown in the year 1889, he calls back God. He addresses God. He yearns for God, who to him is both pain and happiness in one. Nietzsche said, "No, come back," addressing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from his existential experience. "No, come back with all your afflictions. All my tears gush forth, to you they stream, and the last flames of my heart glow for you. Come back, my unknown God. You are my pain and you are my happiness." My dear brothers and sisters, Brother Muhammad, the notion of tears, especially in the Quranic perspective, actually exposes the hypocrisy of religious society.
In what way?
In the sense that we tend to answer the following question as follows. When we ask a very shallow religious individual, do you love goodness more than your dislike and your hate of evil? He may say, my love for goodness equals my hate for evil. But upon reflection, you will notice that our hate for evil is greater than our love for goodness, which is manifested in the way we judge the world, in the way we judge other people, in the lack of mercy sometimes we have. And this is one of the types of tears, which we call crocodile tears. When we shed tears for the victims of our own people, but we fail to shed tears for the victims of humanity. Crocodile tears. We've reached 60 minutes, so I'll conclude in 5 minutes, inshallah. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us to love good more than to hate evil, which psychologically reflects in our behavior. Take the example how the word khair, which is goodness, appears 176 times in the Quran, whereas the word shar, evil, only occurs in 31 times in the Quran. Isn't this an example of how we are called upon to love goodness more than hating evil? How does that link to our discussion on tears in the context of the Najashi in Abyssinia? Shedding tears is the most genuine expression of our humanity. And you know why the Najashi was mentioned in the Quran? Is because the moment of truth through which we can determine whether the tears of a human being are honest or not, incomplete or complete, deformed or ideal, is the very social context of their lives. In other words, someone who is well off financially, someone who does not have any psychological traumas in their lives, a stable emotional life, someone who has a family and has tasted the bare minimum of happiness in life, and yet remained in a state of existential love with God, and yet is capable of shedding tears for something beyond all these life accomplishments, is the person who has genuinely shed the tears of the soul. And Najashi, if you think about it, was a king in the highest ranks of power. He was not in need of power to prove his worth. He was a just king at the level of morality. He was in harmony with his beliefs, his practices, and his life. And yet, when he was exposed to the other, to the Muslim testimony, he saw the truth and he was able to shed the tears of the soul. Doesn't this remind us, my dear brothers and sisters, and I'll finish off with this, of the fact that shedding tears out of love for the truth is a mark of our humane maturity? Isn't this an example of knowing the difference between the word human and the word humane, and knowing that the difference between these two words is the letter E, which signifies the eye, from which we experience the tears of our souls? My dear brothers and sisters, let me finish off with a note on what this discussion means to us today. I think it invites us to develop and grow our emotional and spiritual development. And it invites us to redefine strength and courage. We are taught that crying is weakness. Obviously, men do not cry in front of men. But in their solitude, if they are unable to cry, they are not men. If we are talking in the context of masculinity, which is a big topic today. In short, I think we are called upon to be spiritually mature in the sense that we submit to the soulful expressions of the truth in our psychological outlook to the world. And I think this in itself goes to teach us that the word courage, which came from the Latin cor, which means heart, is what defines our humanity. If we can be like the Najashi, who is overflowing in his tears after hearing the truth, then we have indeed embarked on the journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I will pause here to hear from you, Brother Muhammad, and to hear from our dear brothers and sisters who are viewing this session tonight, whether we can move beyond the tears of grief at the bare minimum level of connection with those we've lost, to the tears of the soul in looking at the suffering of the world, in responding to the truth we encounter in whatever culture, whatever religion we come across. What do you think, my dear brother Muhammad?
Brother, I think you've explained it all. There's not much I can put in from my side. I think you hit all the nails on the head. We hope you've enjoyed the program for today. Inshallah, we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And please give us a thumbs up on YouTube and Facebook, and inshallah we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum.
It's so hard to explain what I'm feeling, but I guess it's okay, 'cause I'll keep believing. There's something deep inside, something that's calling. It's calling you and I. It's taking us up high to healing. A simple act of kindness brings such meaning. A smile can change your life. Let's start living and feeling. Let's start healing. Heal and you will be healed. Break every border. Give and you will receive. It's nature's order. There is a hidden force pulling us closer. It's pulling you and I. It's pulling us apart to healing. A simple act of kindness brings a meaning. A smile can change your life. Let's start healing and feeling. Let's start healing. Hearts in the hand of another heart, and in God's hand are all hearts. An eye takes care of another eye, and from God's eye nothing hurts. Seek only to give and you receive. So heal and you will be healed. Healed, it's